You're on. All right.
How's everyone doing today? Good? Welcome to Lunchalytics. I believe this is our third Lunchalytics of the year and our 30-something overall. We're not quite sure. So we're in the 30s, a little bit awkward stage in our growth, but we're happy that you're all here. We have three speakers: Municipal Affairs with the Government of Alberta, Edmonton Police Service, and Jim Garland with AHS. So I will introduce our first speakers. Do I have to continue to stand over here? No. Okay, our first speakers today are Monty Kruger and Chris Newman. Monty is Executive Director of Municipal Affairs, and Chris is the Manager of Data and Analytics in the Public Safety Division. And their talk is going to be on community risk assessment models. And you can use this as a clicker.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. I have a bit of a cold, so I'm sorry. I'll try and do my best. And I was also at the dentist this morning, so half my face is frozen and I have a cold. What do you know, it's a free lunch. What are you going to do, right? So, community risk assessment model. Just chat a little bit quickly about who we are and what we do. No, not for me. So we are with the Public Safety Division in Municipal Affairs. Public Safety Division is, oh, here we are. Let me try this again. Hey, that's us. The short way, we're responsible for the built environment. So we provide oversight to building codes, the way buildings are built, pressure vessels, elevators, you name it, everything except roads, bridges, and pipelines, and kind of sometimes pipelines. But for the purpose of this talk, we're going to focus on our relationship to the Office of the Fire Commissioner, who's also with us. So one of the things that we're responsible for is kind of providing provincial oversight, guidance, direction to fire services in the province, partnering with them, working with them. In Alberta, all fires are reported to us. So we have this data set where we can look at all the fires. We have about 5,000 fires per year on average. Of those fires, about 30 on average result in deaths in one form or another. About 200 injuries per year. So one of the things that we are really interested in, I mean, you might say, well, it's just 30 deaths, like statistically, it's nothing, right? If it's my house, it matters to me. If I die, I care. So, we're interested. So we're looking at ways that we can work with our fire services to be a little bit more proactive in mitigating the risk of fires. And looking at all of those fires and that, what we came up with traditionally as a risk mitigation strategy was these. These are coloring books, stickers. You probably remember these, Sparky the dog, right? And his little cohort friend there. I don't know what his name is. But anyway, I pass these around. I've got some pencil crayons. You can, right? So we could look at those and say, that's it. We got a pub ed campaign. We're done. I kind of thought we can do better than that. We have to be able to do better than that. And not to say this is all we do. We also have a costume, right? You can wear it at the mall. 6 pairs of gloves to go with it. So, I mean, we're doing other stuff too. Of course, I'm being facetious, but we have the data, right? We should be able to do something better. We should be able to come at this problem from a different angle, see if we can do something better. We can look at the data and we could do our analysis and say, these are the types of houses that burn, this and that and this. But because we're municipal affairs, we also have data for the province, every piece of infrastructure. So we decided to come up with a question, essentially, to say, what can we learn from those places that don't burn? Now, full disclosure, disclaimer, and kind of a bit of a shout out too. We went to the good folks at the Operations Management program at the U of A, one of Dan's classes, and had some students there, see what they could come up with for us. So we tasked them with this. We said, let's take all the data that we have, right? Let's look at the fires that we know have occurred. Let's look at places that didn't burn. Let's look at all of our information. Let's add some socioeconomic data onto that. let's add, what other information we have. See if we can build a model to see if we can predict where fires occur at a community level, feed the information back to the communities, and then work with the various fire communities, municipalities to say, here's where we think your risks are, right? It's no coloring book, but it's the best we could come up with. So at this point, I'm going to kind of turn it over to Chris. We did come up with a model. My understanding of it is that it's based on magic. And I don't mean that Doug Henning onesie silk thing, like the really good magic, right? Like, Santeria Haitian magic. It was good stuff. But Chris may be able to explain a bit better.
I'm not sure I can explain too much better, but I'll give it a shot. So first, I want to ask, just out of curiosity, we had 4 students working on this. Are any of you here? I see no hands raised, so that's good, because I'm gonna talk in lots of hand waving without going into an enormous amount of detail. Next thing I'm going to do is ask how many of you have heard of a support vector machine before. So within the context of machine learning, support vector machines are one of the tools in the toolbox. It's a supervised learning process that allows you to essentially train a model to try and classify, generally speaking, into different categories. You can have multiples, but in our case, we had 2 categories. This house either has a risk to burn or this house doesn't. So essentially, what we're doing, the more technical definitions, we're trying to discover these decision hyperplanes that will classify points into had a fire or didn't have a fire. And they're called support vector machines. The support vector is one data point, one house, and a whole bunch of characteristics about that house. So just to give a bit of additional context, we have the massively successful coloring program and Sparky the fire dog and Sparky's mascot, which we had some ideas for names this morning. I'm not going to repeat them. But we also have done work with our data set. We've been collecting this data. We actually have data in our office going back to the 1920s. Not all of it is digitized, of course, but we have digitized data going back to 1992, I think. So about 25 years of data on fires throughout the province, at least the ones that we know are reported to us. And that's one of the issues that we have, is that not all fires get reported. For example, not everybody is aware that if you put out a fire in your house, you are technically supposed to report that to a safety codes officer, even if you never called the fire department. So if anybody's ever had a pot of oil on the stove that catches fire and you put it out by slamming the pot lid on it, technically speaking, that's a reportable fire. However, most people don't bother in that case. It's the ones where people put pot of oil on the stove, pass out, wake up, find fire completely, or find kitchen completely engulfed, call the fire department. That is a remarkably common cause for residential fires, by the way. Anyway, so we have this data. We have done analysis on it in the past, but what we've never really done is looked at what the data can tell us about the houses, or what the houses that haven't burned can tell us about the risk of fire. So we've been looking at the fire data and saying, oh, the most common day of a fire is a Friday, and smoker materials is a major problem. We should probably do some public education about don't put your cigarette out in a plant pot, that sort of thing. But we've never looked and said what differentiates homes that have been involved in a fire versus homes that haven't. So this is what the support vector model was supposed to do, and what it did actually reasonably well. So you're trying to create a decision hyperplane, which is a fancy way of saying a fancier type of regression, a little bit of additional information on that. And you're trying to find what we call the best system. So you're trying to maximize something called the margin, which is essentially I can divide up my set of fire houses and non-fire houses in multiple ways. The best way is the one that's sort of the most robust, that has the largest differentiation. And support vector machines deal with outliers, and there's some transformation. So you can see a picture down at the bottom that sees you transform your very complicated and curved functions into straight hyperplanes. And of course, all of this is happening in multiple dimensions. So we had a training set to determine those planes. We had a test set to see how they reacted. So we give it information about homes. We ask it to tell us what it thinks is going to happen, and then we look to see did it correctly predict that a home that was involved in a fire would be involved in a fire or not. And so the 2 models that were done was, one, just identifying whether or not a fire was involved, and then there was a focus on the fire-involved houses to say, can we guess at the severity of a fire based on various criteria? So Monty, do you want me to continue and talk about data, or do you want to jump in? Okay. So we used a number of data sources. There were about 70 parameters that ended up being used in the model. Came from two basic sources. First, the Statistics Canada National Household Survey, which of course at the time was 2011. We now have 2016 information, which gives us some detailed information about household income, ownership versus rent, or rental percentages, the number of people who work at home, economic demographics as well, educational levels. All of these things enter into the decision, or enter into a model to determine fire risk in a home. And then the other thing we looked at, as Monty mentioned before, was assessment data. So we have access within municipal affairs to a database in Alberta, and I see Angela here today. So if anybody wants to learn about ASSET, she's one of the administrators. She can tell you all about it. But it contains information, all of the types of information that would go into building assessment. So when municipalities do assessments, they're looking at the age, the size of the lot, presence or absence of a garage or an air conditioning unit or a basement development, the number of bedrooms, the general condition of the home. All of that information is in a database that we have access to. So by taking these two together, trying to tie them together using spatial, for the StatScan, using spatial information, and then trying to tie our fire database information in as well, we can get a full list. Now, we didn't end up using permit data. This was another area that we wanted to start using our own permit and inspection data to say, okay, you know, we've done an electrical inspection on this home. We know that this home's been upgraded to 100 amp service versus 60 amp or something like that. Our permit data is not quite at the level where we can tie it in well at individual property levels. So we have we had some challenges at the time, which have been improving. And the other thing we dropped was data on the particular characteristics of the fire. So we weren't really concerned about where it happened, whether it was a kitchen fire or a garage fire or a basement fire. Weren't particularly concerned about whether it was kids playing with matches, or whether it was an electrical short, or whether it was a smoker putting out a cigarette in a plant pot. And finally, we restricted our data just to make it manageable, and we used Red Deer for our purposes. So we took the city of Red Deer and did this work. I say we, but again, all credit to the 4 students who were involved in the data group. This all predated me, in fact. So this one, I'll turn it back over to Monty to talk about some results.
So essentially, these were the results that we came up with. We did this really as a proof of concept. We weren't trying to build the full-blown model, but just wanted to see if we were on the right track. We took the 4 students, we worked them like rented mules. It really wasn't fair to them. I still apologize whenever I see them, but you know, I think they thought, oh yeah, this would be great, you know, just run a simple regression model. They spent like 90% of the time cleaning the data. It was just grueling. I felt so bad for them, but you know, not that bad. You know, it was good for them too. As proof of concept, this is kind of what we came up with. We had pretty good predictive models. We can essentially predict, you know, this is really, really dumbed down, but bear with me, about 68% of, you know, commercial, 59, 60%. One of the things that we looked at in the literature going into this was a group of PhDs in, I think it was Atlanta, who had done something similar. And you know, like about 3 years of doing it, and they came up with 72 or 73%. And so, you know, over pizza and beer and some really kind of not great data, figured we didn't come up with a bad model. What we ultimately want to be able to do with this, apart from using it as proof of concept, and I see we have some of our fire community folks and friends, want to use this as a basis for going back and having conversations with them. Say, can we improve the data? Can we work with you guys to get, is this something you're interested in? Because ideally, you know, because we work, property is everything we do. We geolocated a whole bunch of this stuff, we can map it. So wouldn't it be great to be able to give a map back to our fire communities, right? Color code it, say, hey, here are your risks. Here are the areas. What are you doing about your pub ed campaigns? Do you do any inspections, you know, commercial, industrial? Did you know about these risks, right? And work with them by giving them some information back so that they can be more efficient, more effective at their job. So, you know, with these ones, I'm not sure how many of them got the Sparky coloring books. I'm sure some of their kids did, that sort of thing. But obviously, you know, I think we can do a bit of a better targeted campaign there in terms of going out and doing some public education. So that is sort of where we're headed. Yeah, I guess I should mention this as well. You know, some identification of data silos. You know, hard data is hard to get, right? And you would think even for us in government working, you know, like Big Brother-ish sort of type data sets, still really hard to get data. And some of those data cleansing things. I have to mention this, but like one of my favorite, everything was address-based, right? Or, you know, some sort of geolocation. Favorite address in the data set. Across the street from my girlfriend's parents' place. So we can probably get some better data in there as well. I don't know the guy's girlfriend or the parents, but it makes it tough to assume where the fire actually was. So at that point, we're going to try and keep it kind of pure to the classic Lunchalytic format here. We'll wrap it up. Does anyone have any questions that I probably can't answer and will rely on Chris for?
I'm just wondering if you vetted your model against insurance models.
We haven't at this point. One of the other hats I wear, I'm the registrar of the new home buyer protection program, so we work pretty closely with them. We just haven't really got it to that point yet, but it would be good, you know, and especially in terms of refinements from the insurance industry who live in the risk world. One of the questions I would ask though as well, like, you know, a lot of our risks that we're looking at, do our assumptions about risk line up the same as the insurance folks? Because, you know, to be somewhat, I don't want to be crass, but, you know, I think some of the risk modeling that they might do is really well aligned towards mitigation of profit loss. And this gets to that. So there would be some alignments, but I think we'd have to check assumptions as well and just make sure that it's a great point. And Chris is nodding.
Yes.
Yes, he's nodding. So he thinks it's a great point too.
We had a student, I'm from McU, who recently worked on crime data from Edmonton and actually using spatial statistics in order to locate where are the hot spots and where are the cold spots within the city. And I was wondering if you tried those models and in order to locate actually where campaigns would be really useful instead of spreading it all out across the province.
That is included in this, but I'll let.
So within the CRAM model, the risk assessment model described here, we didn't specifically do that work, but we have done, and we've looked at some of the data that's out there. So we're using heat mapping, for example, to guide a bit of code development stuff and pub ed stuff. In particular, last October it was Fire Prevention Week. I'm sure you all remember it. But one of the things we went to for the first time, and this is I don't know if this speaks to our level or to how much this stuff has penetrated, but for the first time, our people who are organizing this work came to us and said, you know, in Edmonton, what we've typically done is we've set up one day of the week at each mall. So we set up for a day at Kingsway and a day at Southgate and a day at West Ed. But we think we can do better than that. And is there something that we can do to try and reach out to the right targets, the right audiences? And so what we did is put together, you know, a very basic, I'm not going to say this is the most sophisticated work in the world, but a very basic heat map of where fires occurred and identified that a lot of fires are happening. In particular, when you're talking about Fire Prevention Week, you're talking to homeowners, you're talking to people who live in apartments, you're saying have a plan to escape. Make sure that your smoke detectors are working. Make sure that you've got a carbon monoxide detector, et cetera. And we decided that the focus is going to be on new immigrant communities. Obviously, Edmonton has grown quite a bit, and a lot of that growth has occurred in people coming to Edmonton from different countries where standards may have been different around what to expect. Where if you're renting a building, you may not have an obligation, you may not feel an obligation, or that the landlord has an obligation to make you safe, or keep your living space in a safe condition. So we tied our locations last year for Fire Prevention Week into areas like Alberta Avenue, into areas like Beverly and Clairview, western, areas in the west side of town where lots of new building is going up, and that's been particularly helpful. Now, the other question, or the other thing that in this world, there are a few municipalities that are much further ahead than us, than municipalities in Alberta necessarily. One of those is New York. New York City has, over the last 5 or 6 years, gone through an enormous transformation of its fire inspection and reporting systems. They went from a completely paper-based system, which obviously missed an enormous number of potential issues. They've gone to a new electronic system where inspection reports and building code reports and permit reports are all integrated. They're married to demographic and statistical information, as well as, I think they even, because they're at the municipal level, they tie into their human services, social services areas, so they can identify people with who are struggling to make ends meet, who might be living in under code developments, that sort of thing. And they focus their inspection efforts on a daily basis towards the highest risk areas within their individual precincts. So this was in large part was the result of a really bad fire that occurred. Lots of death. I don't remember the exact number, but it was an old building that had been condemned. All of the fire escapes had been welded shut, and yet it was used by squatters. People were even renting from quote unquote landlords, and perished in that fire. And so the inspection reports had come in, and the inspection had identified this is a problem. We need to get somebody to open up those doors again. And nothing had ever come of it because it was a piece of paper that got, that settled into the bottom of somebody's inbox. And so that prompted a huge change. And so over the last 5 or 6 years, they put an enormous amount of money towards it and lots of analytical firepower. And they have some pretty sophisticated algorithms that are running on an ongoing basis to identify those key priority areas. And they go out on a daily basis with those reports. Sorry, does that help? So contextualize? Good.
Okay, we'll maybe catch you after. We can follow up one-on-one. We're getting the nod signal here. So, I said wearing the lapel mic made me feel like LeBron James being mic'd up, and now getting the wrap it up signal, I feel like I'm at the Oscars. So all in all, a good day. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, that was good. Next up, we have the Edmonton Police Service. Mohammed Salama, I think I pronounced that right, and Joanne Fox. Mohammed is a statistical analysis, and Joanne's a geographic deployment analyst. And their presentation is Walking the Beat, but where?
Hi guys. So my name is Mohammed Salama. Oh, sorry. My name is Mohammed Salama, and that's Joanne Fox, and we work for the Edmonton Police Service. So today we're going to be talking to you about beats and a statistical model we used to identify beat areas. So a little bit of background. So in addition to the typical patrol officer that you see in the car, we have a group of members that will walk or patrol an area, walking on foot or bike. So their goal is to create a vibrant, safer community by reducing calls for service. And their kind of key thing is to be visible in the community. So they want to interact and develop relationships with members in the community, stakeholders. So they effectively become the go-to to a lot of the problems that arise from whether it's problem addresses, problem people, complaints, right? So the beat members also have to take ownership of that area. So they kind of take a proactive approach in working with the community to get to try to make it more vibrant. So in addition to the community policing, the beat members also have to respond to calls for service that happen within their beat and around their beat. So they will help the patrol units and support them if calls come in or if they get overloaded. So we did consultations with the different beat members across all the divisions, and we were able to find that there's kind of two types of beats. We have a traditional beat and an entertainment beat. So a traditional beat is an area with a large repeat calls for service, and your entertainment beat is your high density bar and license establishment. So you get your like White Ave, your Jasper Ave. And the workload profile for each beat is different. So for example, your entertainment beat, a lot of their workload would be on a weekend dealing with the crowd control, intoxicated people, problem establishments. So the traditional beat has a different type of workload. Oops. Uh-oh. Sorry. Uh-oh. That's so good. Oh, back there. Perfect. So we asked the beat members what variables they thought would warrant a beat. And we got very little consistency between the divisions, between the beats. So the problem is, where are beats needed, and what are the variables that would warrant a beat? So we had to think kind of outside the box, because we did research to see from other agencies, had they tackled this problem, and none of the agencies were able to answer the goals of the project. So then we went to biology. So we found the resource selection model. And so the resource selection model is a model where organisms are trying to find selected areas, and we're trying to find the environmental attributes for that area, and to find other areas where we find the same attributes. So we applied it to beats. So the fundamental assumption that we had to take is that the current beat locations are correct. All other locations become potential beat locations, and then we're going to start looking for what are these environmental factors that warrant the beat. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So, sorry, I have my security blanket. Some people have like dolls and stuff, but this is my piece of paper. So what we did here is we split the city into 100 by 100 meter grids using GIS. So why 100 meters by 100 meters? First of all, that already gave us 70,000 grid cells to work with. So we figured that that was granular enough. Any bigger, we would kind of be aggregating that data too much. Any smaller, it would have taken days to run. So that's where we chose the 100 meter by 100 meter. Then we looked at close to 300 internal and external variables. So one of the great things about the open data initiative with the city of Edmonton is that there's a lot of open data sets now. So we collected everything from flowers and bloom locations, light standards, like accident location, like anything that was on open data that we could get our hands on, as well as the civic census, so based on neighborhoods, so population, demographics. We also looked at our own internal variables, so number of calls for service, the type of calls beats were responding to, bylaw calls, all types of stuff. So what we did with that is that we first initially ran a regression to see which variables were significant. And so one of the things that we found, and I'll talk a little bit about it in the results, is that there were some differences between the traditional and entertainment beats in terms of what variables constituted having a beat there. Then we ran the resource selection model in order to find out the probability of those grid squares and where we're going to have a beat. So again, the fundamental assumption that Mo described is that the current beats are correct in where they are. So that's one of the limitations. We couldn't start from scratch. We needed some kind of baseline. In speaking with our membership, which is crucial in any type of analysis that we do. From an operational perspective, they have a lot of insight. They've been on the job for so long that they have this, qualitative information for us that we use in conjunction with this. So we trust that their assumption is correct. So where the beats are correct. So these are some of the results. So instead of displaying this or giving them some stats in an Excel sheet, everything we do, we try to visualize for them, because a picture says 1,000 words. So we put everything on a map for them. So this is a result example for our entertainment beat probabilities. So what you'll see is the probability gradient. So the darker the red, the higher the probability of needing a beat in that grid square. And then you also had at the time, so this was run in 2015. So these were our beat locations in 2015. So you had the outline in blue were our entertainment beats. So you'll see Jasper Ave downtown, and you'll see White Avenue south of the river. And then our traditional beat areas were outlined in green there. So you can see, obviously, because the initial assumption is that our beat locations are correct. All those darker red areas, for the most part, are within our beat areas, but we also noticed for White Avenue, they were along the avenue, but then it kind of stretched a little bit. It was a little colder south, but it went east and west instead. So based on these results for entertainment beats, there were some divisions that switched their beat boundaries and actually confirmed, yeah, we should be looking at this, like this isn't where we should be walking. So White Avenue specific, those beat boundaries have changed. We also identified some areas that weren't known to members. So that kind of top area where it's dark red. So based on the variables that we ran, we found that that would be a good location to have a beat. So again, we go back to our beat members operationally and say, hey, like what's up there? What's going on? Is that an area that we should be looking into? And as it turns out, I think that that's like a strip mall or something like that, something that they wouldn't typically walk. So that's something that, the data pulls that out for us and identifies it, but operationally, that's not something that they would consider at that time. So this is entertainment beats. The next map is our traditional beat probabilities. And we just took a section, like we did this for the whole city. There are some results in the south, but this was typically our main results here. So same thing, darker the red, the higher the probability. So you'll see that where our traditional beats are the darker red ones, but we also identified a lot of area, for example, here in the downtown cores, that weren't being covered by the beats, where they could benefit from beats. So based on this probability map and in talks with the operations, we did switch the beat boundaries downtown. Specifically too, we had another project going on with the opening of Rogers Place and an influx of new beat members that we were getting downtown that we needed to relook at that. So, but this provided us a good context of where we could start looking at putting these beat members. So what's next? It's one thing to determine the location of beats, but then how do you staff those locations? And how do you determine their workload? So one of the biggest challenges that we have is determining what that workload definition is. So for patrol, for example, their main mandate is answering calls for service. So if you call the police, you call 911, you expect somebody to come. With beats, their mandate is community building, relationship building, and prevention. So the whole purpose of beats is to prevent crime from happening. So how do you measure something that hasn't happened? We found that about 70% of their time spent is on proactive policing, so building those relationships, walking the beat, having that visibility, which can't be measured, and then the other 30% are answering calls for service. So the other part to that too is that they are still police officers. So if something is happening or a call comes in and they are there, they have to answer that call. So how do you differentiate what patrol does and what beats does, and what is that? How do you combine those together? Which brings me to the next point, the integration with a patrol model. So we do have a patrol model that allows us to equitably distribute resources around the city. So we do that with a queuing model. The queuing model that we use accounts for travel time and area, which is a limitation for using it for beats because it assumes that you're using a car, you're going a certain speed and you're covering a certain area. The beat is a foot patrol model. So there's no model that we know of that exists specifically for beats. And as Mo said, that we had reached out to other police agencies in both the States and in Canada to see what type of modeling that they use, how they determine their beats. And their answer was, well, when you come up with something, share it with us. So yeah, so that's why we went with the resource selection model. And then determining the number of beat members required. So this is another limitation of our queuing model with patrol. So our patrol model will allow us to figure out how many members we need to police certain areas. Because of the limitations I just described, we can't do that for our beat members. So when our beat areas or sergeants are saying, well, you know what, we've seen our workload increase over the last 10 years. How many more beat members do we need? We're still trying to figure that out. We could do it the opposite way. So with the downtown arena project and the redistribution of beats there, we were able to come up with an alternative schedule for them because we knew how many beat members they were getting. So that's the main difference. So that's kind of what's next. If anybody has any ideas, we're totally open to how to figure this out, but that's exactly what we're working on. And if anybody has any questions. Yep.
So I'm working with EMS volume data, and I see some similarities here. So two interesting things that I see in my data is, first of all, a changing distribution from downtown to the northern part of the city in the last 2 years. And the other is difference of seasonality pattern in different regions, meaning the different regions will experience peak at different times during the week. I was wondering whether you have looked into spatial temporal models to identify such seasonalities.
So spatial temporal using GIS, we haven't done that, but we have done that. We use R a lot. So we have looked at spatial temporal because we recognize that there is seasonality to policing, right? And especially with beat policing. So I think they call it the red zone from April or like late April. So when university gets out to September, and then it's kind of like the cold zone, like nobody's really outside. During the winter time. So that's an important factor. We do look at that for scheduling purposes to figure out when is the best time that beach should be out there. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Because one possibility can be to change the route based on the time of the beach, whether it's midnight or
yes.
noon. Do they do that?
So not with our patrol, not with our beats, but with our patrol model. So the one that we can't use for beats because of the limitations I described. So with the patrol model, what the queuing model does is looks at every hour of every day of every week for the entire year. And so that's where we can identify the peaks and figure out what the minimums are for each of those hours. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I know the city of Edmonton has worked a couple of years ago around just reducing crime in areas by planting trees, just putting in park benches. We saw that data too.
Yes. So. Well, that's exactly it, right? But you're right. So from the open data, we had like flowers in bloom. We had bus stops, and so we tried to bring.
We did have park benches.
We did have park benches, yeah. And so we brought it into the model as to see one of the environmental factors in. So yes. Yeah.
It's amazing how much safer everybody feels around people with dogs.
Yes. Yeah. Any other?
So I noticed in some of your example maps there that you were highlighting areas that didn't have infrastructure that was aligned with beats. So you mentioned that the area at North 137, well, strip malls is able to avoid that. There's no sidewalks. Mm-hmm. So in future iterations, are you looking to develop or add to that model where you can look at what the footpaths are and what is available in that area.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really good point. So we're working on this right now at work on how to improve this. So it's a work in progress every single time, just to try to get it to be a little bit better. This is the first time they've looked at beats in this way. And we did this in 2015. So before then, it was just all operational knowledge. Yeah, I walk here, so I think we need a beat here. I love venues like this to talk about what we're doing and the analytics that we're doing. I mean, we could talk about this for all day long. But one of the things is, and I think there's a kind of a misconception that, the police just say we need to be there because we need to be there, when, like, spread it to your friends. We do work on this and we try to figure it out and put some qualitative measurements behind it. But that's a good point. And I want to say that a couple of our variables were like infrastructure, like sidewalks or something like that. So
I don't know if we had sidewalks in the data set.
yeah, but that's a good point. Walking paths, exactly, for beats. So
I think if we can, like, as we get more variables into the model, we can start looking at that. And if it becomes readily available, it becomes easier to implement into the model.
Okay.
We got one more question, or no? We got cut.
Okay, sorry.
We can talk after.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up we have Jim Garland with Alberta Health Services. He has an epic title that I have to look up. Jim's the Associate Executive Director for EMS Dispatch Communications and Deployment. And today he's going to be talking on using analytics to address response time challenges. You're good there?
I think I'm okay. Everybody can hear me okay?
We are good.
Thanks very much. So thanks very much for having me here today. I'm a late addition, so I was asked in short notice to be here. That's actually relevant because we use analytics every day in how we make decisions and support those decisions in our delivery of emergency medical services around the province. So just some quick context. This is a provincial delivery model. Right at this moment, we have more than 500 ground resources logged onto our dispatch system, 11 fixed wing resources, and 3 full-time rotary resources around the province. What that means is we have a great opportunity every time those units move or are assigned to events to create data and information and be able to use that data and information to make decisions. So I was asked just to provide I'm going to flip through a bunch of these slides here quickly. I was asked to provide an example of how we use analytics to do our work. So the problem that we were trying to address was in one of our urban environments, the city of Calgary, we saw some alarmingly increases in response time. And the hypothesis was that when we made a bunch of significant technology and workflow changes in June 2017, that we created this environment. And we created this degradation in response times. So what we looked at here was we looked at what we call the pre-travel intervals. So the time it takes to actually locate the address and verify it, locate the closest ambulance and get it alerted and dispatched, and also the shoot time. So the shoot time is essentially where the staff are notified that they have an event and the time it takes them to get to their unit, whatever environment they're in, and notify through a status messaging that they're actually on the way to the event. So as you can see in this one, I'm going to walk through here, sorry. As you can see in this, where we made these changes in June, we did see somewhat of an increase in some of these intervals as a result of change in workflow. But then what we've seen subsequent is we've seen them somewhat normalize. Travel and response intervals. So this is from the time the crews start to move till the time they arrive on the location. This is the travel and the response interval. So the response interval is adding up all those pieces. So the time it takes to dispatch, shoot time, and their travel, that's the response interval. And the travel is the amount of time it takes to travel from where they were notified to the location of the emergency. So what we were able to demonstrate here was we were able to demonstrate that from a period of time way before we started to have issues or we implemented these changes in June, we were starting to see that we were already having increases in our travel time and our response intervals. This one specifically, this graph, speaks to the impact of seasonal variations, more specifically, snow events. So if you've been watching the media, the city of Calgary, and this was a surprise to me, okay, I've grown up in Alberta. City of Calgary this year has experienced a higher accumulation of snow that they've ever had on record. Accumulation meaning the amount of snow they have at one time. So any of you from Calgary realize that you get a bunch of snow, it melts. You get a bunch of snow, it melts. You get a bunch of snow, it melts. The rest of us that live in the rest of the province, like Edmonton, you get snow, you get snow, you get snow, you get snow until springtime. So this is significant because we're able to demonstrate here the impact of these snow events historically on response times and the travel intervals, and also the recent issues they've had in Calgary this year. This is significant because not only do we get impacts on our travel intervals when we're actually having the snowfall and before the streets are cleaned, but any of you that have seen ambulances traveling around the urban area, those trucks are wide. So once they start to clean up the roads and they build the snow up on the curbs, the lanes narrow. So subsequent to the snowfall for a period of time, we do see increases in the travel interval. So as I said, travel interval, proximity to event, things that impact driving or travel speed. We got driving conditions and the route characteristics or congestion. So as we're seeing congestion increase, either as a result of population, the design in the urban environment, or we're seeing congestion as a result of things like seasonal variations, we see impacts to travel. And what we're seeing is way back prior to our changes in June, we've seen these impacts start to impact our response times. Unit availability. So this is significant. So the two things that have the biggest impact on response times are the number of units that are available to respond and how far they have to travel. So what we've seen here in our analysis is that as the availability of units decreases, you see on the bottom the percentage of time where there's no units available. So there's no units available, then we're pulling units from places that we historically don't pull them from to try and respond to these events. So one of the things that we did in the province when we went to this provincial model in 2009 was there's never not an ambulance available in the province. 100% of the time there's an ambulance available in the province. Question is, how far away is it? It could be 7 hours. So anyway, this is how we're trying to demonstrate how the unit availability over a period of time has had impact on these Calgary response times. And again, this is just demonstrating by hour of day. So, we look at hour of day, we look at day of the week, we look at, as I said earlier, seasonal variations. We look at how things are impacted by events. In Calgary, for example, what's significant is Stampede, the Stampede event. So one of the other things that negatively impacts, if you watch the media, negatively impacts our unit availability is hospital wait times. So as crews are transporting to hospitals, the hospitals doesn't have the ability to decant the patient off the EMS crew. We get ambulances that are stuck in hospitals. So they're sitting there in the hospitals. As ambulances accumulate in the hospitals, there's less ambulances in the community to respond. Therefore, they're traveling farther to respond to events. So we're starting to see a significant increase, and this has been experienced in Edmonton for the last number of years, as Brian in the back can attest to. But we're starting to see the same kind of things happen in the city of Calgary that we had experienced in Edmonton, and seeing the same impacts to response times. And again, this is look at based on the number of hours we have assigned. So the hours assigned is relevant to or reflective of the number of crews we have scheduled over any period of time. So we're looking at the number of hours where we have units assigned or assigned to events. So we got units scheduled, and then we have units that are assigned to event. If they're assigned to event, they're not available to respond. And then that has that impact on unit availability. So the more calls that we have, the more units that we have assigned to events, the less available we have to respond to the next call. And then this is just another demonstration of how the time spent in the emergency department has been changed and how it's impacting our overall response performance. So you can see we quite often get caught up in looking at, you know, this month or this week versus that week, but you can see that we're getting a steady increase in response time, or sorry, hospital time, which impacts our unit availability and system capacity. And this is just looking at a number of different hospitals in Calgary. So we look at individual hospitals. Are there situations that are impacting unit availability based on the characteristics of the hospital? So in Edmonton, you know, Royal Albert, U of A are trauma centers, the community hospitals, and the impacts that those services have on keeping our units gathered into the hospital. So this is more reflective of the hours that are assignable. So how much capacity do we have in the system versus you know, how they're being assigned, or how that impacts their availability. And then again, this is another demonstration of us looking at unit proximity. So unit proximity, we use deployment modeling tools to try and determine where the next call is going to be, and that's how we place our resources in the urban environment, and then how we utilize suburban and rural resources to complement that when they're in the city. So this demonstrates how what's going on in the city of Calgary, how that's impacted driving proximity. So less units, farther away from the call, longer response time. And then of course this talks more about the driving conditions and speed. So all of our units in the province are on automatic vehicle, or utilizing automatic vehicle locating technology. So every time they move, we capture data. So we're able to use that information to complete some of this analysis. So just a bit of a demonstration how we can look at all these different variables and assess the impacts using multiple variables, and how further we can pursue the analysis of what the issue is. And this is strictly related to the impact of what we did in June. So in June, in the Calgary urban environment, we implemented our system status management tool. So the system status management tool uses historical data, machine learning, to try and determine best places to place units, given the number of units that we have available. Looks at historical data on call volumes, looks at schedule and availability. It looks 30 minutes ahead and says, historically, these ambulances cleared up from this hospital within this period of time. I should have an ambulance clear. I'll use that one to cover this community. And the relocations is how often they're relocated to move from place to place. As you can imagine, that has an impact on our staff. If they spend a lot of their shift moving from place to place, plus doing calls, they don't get a lot of downtime. And this is the portion of time they're in that actual relocation mode. So we measure, of course, once they're relocated, how long does it take for them to get to where they're being relocated? And that impacts how we apply our system status management. So sorry, that was really quick. I just wanted to give you a really good understanding of how we use analytics to do our work. And now I get to declare my conflict. So these tools that we have and this ability to use analytics to improve our performance has become very popular, especially in our health environment. And now that we have all of our resources on one CAD system and they're feeding one source of data, we have some jobs available coming up here in the near future. Probably next month, you'll see some postings for analysts to work with some of these tools and do some of this work. So look on the Alberta Health Services website for those. Thanks.
Any questions?
So I'm not an analyst, I'm the business guy. Go ahead.
With some of your models, do you take into account seasonality in relation to idle times, fuel stocks and stuff?
No, we don't. We don't, because so our system is based on the premise that once a unit's logged on, it's always available unless it's booked at a service, and it's always ready to go. So fueled up and everything ready to go.
So do you track the out of service time?
Yes, we do. We do track the out of service time. So that out of service time, that informs our unit availability time.
So there's a change in the system. People spend more, technicians spend more time in hospitals, is that right? So wait times went up. Solve this problem by moving people to different locations in order to better address the problem. So why are people spending more time in hospitals? And why are these technicians, what happened there?
So just quickly, population aging, more people require some sort of bricks and mortar institution to be looked after. We're behind in getting those residences in those places for seniors. Because there's no place for them, they're on the wards in the hospital waiting to be placed. And because they're on the wards in the hospital, the people in the emergency department that need to be admitted are sitting in the emergency department and waiting to be admitted. And now we have ambulances continually to bring people into the emergency department. That's essentially what that is. I just want to make one more comment. So after showing all of that, what do we do with that? We also have modeling tools where we will make changes to the system, add resources, change their schedules, place them differently, and we model those scenarios. Sorry.
So my understanding is that AHS has brought in a new system, Optimal Life.
So that's the system status management tool I told you about. Yeah.
So has that changed? Have you seen any based on?
Very good question. So if we have an environment that never changes and you add a workflow, a tool, you can either see it get worse, stay the same, or get better. But the problem is we have growing demand. We have all these other variables, growing demand, limited capacity, longer hospital wait times. So we're pretty sure that, and we're just working through on how to demonstrate that implementing Optima has actually mitigated the impact of those things that I just showed you. So yeah. And that was the idea of this, was to try and demonstrate that it wasn't the change in technology that all of a sudden things got worse. Things have been getting worse for quite a while. Yeah, so.
Are you accounting for the medical calls that are part of some of the calls as well?
So all of these calls are EMS calls. Fire will go to some of these EMS calls. So it's not EMS calls plus fire calls. It's EMS calls and fire goes to some of them. So using medical first response is a industry best practice. For some events, medical first response has an impact because they can get there quicker, station-based. Other times, if we have trouble getting an ambulance to a location in a timely manner, they can provide medical first response. So there's a number of calls where fire is sent to and a number of calls where they're not. In Edmonton, Brian, what are we at, 28%, 25% MFR?
Of your calls? Or
Yeah, of our calls.
I don't know, of ours, 60% of the calls that fire go to are medical calls, 40% are fire or rescue related.
And in the over 100,000 events in Edmonton, I think we're at about 28% of those MFR fire goes to. Does that help? No. Yeah, no, today we don't do that. Today we don't incorporate the MFR. Intuitively, we feel better if we don't have a resource in a community. This doesn't reflect the urban environment. In a community, if we have good MFR support there. But yeah, it's not built into the modeling, not yet. That's it. Thanks very much, you guys. Oh, sorry.
Thanks to our speakers. A few things. Lunchalytics will be in Calgary on Monday. Our very own Craig Schramm will be speaking. Get a chance to check it out live or live stream.
So we don't have
streaming it. Yeah. We have Lunchalytics next month. If you want to speak or if you have a topic you're interested in, you can contact us on the website, lunchalytics.com. And I think that's it. Oh, Oh, we want sponsors. We sponsored this one, but we're always looking for sponsors. So if you're interested in sponsoring, please contact us.
What's the theme for next month?
I don't know, actually. They didn't tell me. They just told me to stand up here. Do we know? No. We don't know yet. It'll be up on the website shortly. Okay, thank you.